Good morning from Helsinki. We're 1 week away from the shortest day of the year, um, the 21st of December. We're projected to have about 5 hours and 58 or 59 minutes of daylight. I overheard some people the other day. I was at a cafe downtown in Helsinki, and they were joking about one person said that they saw the 6 minutes of sunlight that we've had so far in December. As you know, we're 60 degrees north latitude here in Helsinki, and this time of year, sunrise is maybe, I guess, around 9 or so, and then sets, around 3. So, but there's really not a lot of sunlight. It's mostly overcast days, lots of clouds. Although Friday and yesterday there were peaks of sun and there was actually blue sky. We actually saw blue sky. It seemed like for so long there was no blue sky. And I get up early anyway. I sleep more, obviously, when there's little or no sunlight. Like many people, you hibernate a bit, but I still get up and do my walks early in the morning, and I also write and edit. But it was like I was describing to somebody, it was like you can get up early, do stuff, go for a long walk in the dark. You see all these dogs on the trails with their blinking light collars. I don't know if the dogs like that, but and then you go back inside and maybe you work on something, have a coffee or 10, and then you go outside in the afternoon, or you have a meeting or something, or you want to do something, or and then you step outside and it's dark and you're like, it's like, you woke up and it was dark, and then you're just going to do something in the afternoon and it's dark, and so you completely miss the daylight. But these people were talking about, it was so funny. I joined in their conversation a little bit because they were talking about the 6 minutes of sunlight that they projected we've had so far in December. And it really is amazing, like, especially if you're outside a lot. Like, I've been hiking and camping a lot since midsummer, all right around 60 degrees north. I was in Sweden most of the summer at midsummer. I was in Sweden, and I remember distinctly, I was taking a walk. It was probably the day after midsummer, and there was this really, really nice gentleman I would often run into on my walks because he was walking his dogs, and he has black labs, and at that time he had just gotten a 9-week-old puppy. He had like a 4 or 5 year old dog as well, and he said, kind of a note of resignation and kind of with humility that you see often in these parts of the world, is that he said, basically what he said, yes, it is midsummer now, and very soon it will be Yule, it'll be Christmas. It'll be Christmas before you know it. And that is so true, but when you think about that, is if you get to spend that amount of time in the Nordics, you go from the white nights, you go from all this energy, this fantastic energy, and you can feel it, your creativity, your flow, your thinking, when it's sunlight, nearly 24 hours, but then you feel it's this quick descent into darkness. And there always comes a point, usually in November, when you're like, wait a second, like, when are we going to see the sun again? And so yesterday, the 13th of December, is Santa Lucia, Saint Lucia Day, which took on quite a tradition in the Nordic countries. It was brought from missionaries in southern Italy, of course, or southern Europe, I meant. But it is, yeah. The actual saint, Santa Lucia, is from Syracuse on Sicilia, and was known for the reason she's a saint is because she grew up very privileged, and she gave up a lot of her wealth to help people in need. And also the Christians who were hiding in the catacombs in Rome, she would bring them food and other supplies and needs. And so the legend is that she would wear crown of candles, basically, so her hands were free, so she could carry more while she was in the catacombs, and so that's why she's a saint. So obviously they had a great marketing plan when they came to Sweden, the old kingdom of Sweden, and telling them about this saint and this holiday that they celebrate on what was the darkest day of the year. They switched to the Gregorian calendar, so now the 13th isn't the darkest, shortest day of the year, but traditionally it was celebrated, and then they would crown somebody, some young girl, Saint Lucia, Lucia, whatever you want to say, depends on where you're from. And to have a little ceremony with that. They still do that, like in Helsinki at the big Lutheran cathedral. They name some young woman, Santa Lucia, and they do the ceremony with the candles, the candle crown. When I was a little kid at a Lutheran church, I had to dress up on, Saint Lucia Day, and sit around a tree or something. I forget. And it was like when you think back on it as a kid, when you're in your single digits, and you're told about there's this other holiday, because there's so much pressure and marketing around Christmas, and you get days off of school and and family and all this traditions, and then you're like, well, what's this other holiday? Like, why do we even bother with this? We don't. What is it? And then now as an adult, I was like, it's brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant, especially in these Nordic winters. It was like I can understand why the tradition came on. And it's still more like in the Finnish context, obviously Lutheran Church does celebrate it, but it's more the Swedish-speaking community. And that's why I think that there aren't like specific words in Finnish language for it still like hyvä Lucia, and they use the Swedish spelling. So like in Finnish there is no letter C. Hard C is K and soft C is S. So when you see like the letter C or B, F, Q, W, Z, it's a loan word from another language. And then there's also the lusekat, the saffron buns that are traditionally sold all over the cafes on Santa Lucia Day. But it got me thinking about like just a simple word like that, Lucia. Depends on where you are and what context and what language is how you pronounce it. It seems like it's, and so that's why I always hesitate when I'm saying it, because I have to think in what language, and I've been concentrating so much in the last several years on improving my Italian. So I say Lucia, Santa Lucia, and they actually celebrate it quite a lot. I mean, obviously because the saint is from Sicilia, there's traditions around that, but then they celebrate a little bit differently in the north. I spent most of the first part of this year in Lombardia, and somebody was telling me about that there still is a stronger connection to this holiday and the darkest day of the year and the light and the contrast and the story of this saint. But I was thinking about it, if in Italy you say Santa Lucia, and I was on the island of Saint Lucia in the Caribbean. I guess it was January 2024. I have a friend who spends almost every winter in Barbados, and so I was down there, and then I went to some of the other islands, Trinidad, Tobago, Martinique, Guadeloupe, and Saint Lucia. I loved Saint Lucia. I have some very fun memories from there, and also one of my favorite writers is Derek Walcott, who is from Saint Lucia, and writes about it, reimagined the Homeric myth of Odysseus, as if it was um, starting from the harbor in Saint Lucia and the fishermen. But anyway, so as I was thinking about this word, it was like, in up here in the north, Lucia, Sankta Lucia, the word is um, transfigured into Lucie, Lucinda, Lucille, whatever, in like in a American or English context. But I don't think anyone says Saint Lucie. Um, but then, when you go to the island of Saint Lucia, it's definitely Saint Lucia. You don't say Lucia, you don't say Lucia, you don't say Lucia. It's more because they call themselves Lucians mostly. But there's variations within the island. It has a long, complicated colonial history and a lot of mixing. Like this poet I mentioned, the Nobel Prize laureate Derek Walcott. I think he had Dutch, English, and African, and some indigenous connection. So he was definitely a real mixture. But he grew up in a context of, I think his family was Methodist, and grew up speaking English, learning English very, very, very well, that he was able to be one of the greatest poets and playwrights of the 20th century in English. And it's funny that lots of other places claim him, like I think Trinidad and Tobago claim him, and because I believe he spent maybe his early adult life there, was involved in theater there, and then of course he was in Boston for a few decades teaching at Boston University, and he loved Boston, New York, but he had a home in Saint Lucia, where I got to spend. I'm so glad I made that trip. I got to spend a few days in the north of the island, a few days in the south of the island. One of the funny things is that there are two airports on this tiny island. It's barely bigger than the District of Columbia. They have one airport that's for like international flights that has longer runway, and then there's the cute little airport on the north end near the capital of Castries. But I think they're trying to build out the runway so that they can get the longer flights there. But it right now just has prop planes. So I flew from Barbados to Saint Lucia a couple times back and forth, and it's neat. It's like it's not really an airport. It's like the check-in stands are outside. It's like, and you just wait across the street. There's the beach, and there's a beach bar, and you can hear all the announcements while you're sitting there, hot, humid day, having a lovely drink, and you can just be attentive enough to the announcements that you can catch your flight, because then you go immediately through security, and there's barely a waiting area. Anyway, but the island, of course, is very mountainous, gorgeous, and the people. I went to several. I love Barbados and the other ones, but I made such great connections with the people. Everyone I met, and I had, just meet somebody, and then you have lunch with them, and you talk about all kinds of things, and you may never see them again, but and one evening, so I was staying in Barre Saint Joseph, Barre Saint Joseph, which is technically within Castries, the big city, but it's very, very rural. And I stayed in this lovely place that had spectacular views of the mountains and the valleys and out to the sea. And I was like, well, I'm going to take a walk. I'm going to walk into Castries, soak in some of the atmosphere, see the Piazza Derek Walcott, where the Derek Walcott statue is, and just go around the markets and just see what's going on there. Well, it started out really nice, and the scenery was wonderful, and I was walking along the side of a road, a little bit unsafe. There's definitely no footpaths or bike paths or anything. and then it starts raining. Just a little quick shower, but it was a little bit rough. And the roads are all potholed and rough, and it's very steep and winding. And I was walking. I was actually closer to Castries at this point, and I really bit it. Like I haven't, I walk so much, and I take calculated risks when I walk. I have very little fear. But I just like the slick rocks, and I just really, really took a tumble. And it bled a little bit around my knee, and then I had this scar for more than a year. It's mostly gone now, but people would ask me about it, and so I'm like, okay, well, this isn't great. And then I was a little bit shaky on my feet. I hadn't taken a tumble like that in a long time. That reminds me of Coleridge, Samuel Taylor Coleridge, talking about mountaineering and scrambling, and how that's the only time in his life that he took risks and didn't regret it. But anyway, so I get into Castries. I'm a little bit zoppicando. I'm a little bit limping, and but I didn't let that deter me. I think it continued to rain a little bit, and then my plan was to maybe find some fun things in the market and then cook back at this lovely little place I was staying. But I was like, well, I don't know. I guess I should rest my leg a little bit. And so I kind of cleaned myself up, and I didn't realize that I was still bleeding a little bit. It wasn't really like a gash. It wasn't like really that bad. But so then I took my tour, took some pictures, bought some things, and then I'm like, well, I better go get a taxi. And so I see a couple guys around I guess it was an official taxi stand, maybe not. But there were a few taxis there. They were all out just chatting a little bit. So I walk up to this one guy, and he sees me. He's probably in his 60s, early 60s, maybe, I would guess. And he says, "Okay, yeah, I'll take you. Where are you going?" "Oh, Barre Saint Joseph." Yeah, da, 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 da. And we just talked and talked and talked. And I was like, and I realized, there's a couple more things I want to get. And he says, "Well, I need to get some stuff at the store too." And so it's like everything felt so relaxed and natural. And it was like I felt like I really got to know this guy on this 40-minute cab ride, which included us stopping at the grocery store, and we shared so many things. And we talked about it's in such a small country that has like one famous great writer like Derek Walcott. It's hard not to bring him up. But we actually didn't. I think until the end, but he talked about reading, and he said that he doesn't feel alive unless he's in the middle of at least one or two books. And he had two books, like paperback books, in his taxi, and we talked about all kinds of writing and what kind of books he likes. He likes more like mass market bestseller type fiction. I'm not snobby when it comes to writing, as you know, but we talked about some. I think Dickens. I think Dickens is the one that we talked about the most, that we connected on, and some 20th century writing. I think he liked Hemingway a little bit, but yeah, the book he was reading at that time wasn't something I would read. But fine. I mean, we had a great time. He was talking about he was going to go on a date that evening after he dropped me off. We talked about so many things. But the funny part is that right when I got into the cab, before we went to the grocery store, I didn't realize that there were some rivulets of blood that had dried on my leg. Like I thought I had cleaned myself up and that I wasn't bleeding anymore. But apparently when I was walking around, a little bit more was coming out. And so when he saw me, he saw the blood, and he was just like, "Yeah, I know." I was telling him, "Yeah, I took a little bit of a tumble." He says, "Yeah, I know." It was like it was comforting in a way. Like he was so hospitable and humorous, And it wasn't at all bothered by the state of me, that somebody might think that, this might be some kind of crazy person. But everything turned out okay. We laughed about it, and so that was my experience on Saint Lucia. I had another great experience when I stayed in Soufrière, and I learned from the coconut seller, where I would go every morning. Fresh coconut in the morning. There's nothing better. I learned more about coconuts than I ever thought I would. And then snakes. And I had another taxi driver on Martinique who was so excited to show me a video. He had just killed a big boa the weekend before, and he had video to prove it. He said they're not that common, but if you take risks hiking and scrambling around, you're probably you're going to be more likely to encounter one. But anyway, Saint Lucia Day, Saint Lucia, 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 Lucie, however you want to say it, Lucia, I guess. There's Spanish history on the island as well. But it's like, I don't know why I'm making this connection. It's just the name, and obviously, the island was named after the same saint. It's the only country in the world that's named after a woman. I think Ireland is named after a goddess, but Saint Lucia is named after someone who apparently walked the earth just like we do. Anyway, before I ramble on too much, I wanted to do a couple of Derek Walcott's poems. If you ever get a chance, you should read Omeros, his long epic, of course, a retelling in some ways, and a 20th century Caribbean take on the Odyssey. But he did this one. He said dark. Some of his short poems I'm really appreciating more as I get older, I guess. But dark August poem, it kind of reminded me of this interplay between dark and light that this tradition of Santa Lucia, Santa Lucia, Lucia brings. He says, so much rain, so much life, like the swollen sky of this black August. My sister, the sun, broods in her yellow room and won't come out. Everything goes to hell. The mountains fume like a kettle, rivers overrun. Still, she will not rise and turn off the rain. She is in her room, fondling old things, my poems turning her album. Even if thunder falls like a crash of plates from the sky, she does not come out. Don't you know I love you, but am hopeless at fixing the rain. But I am learning slowly to love the dark days, the steaming hills, the air with gossiping mosquitoes, and to sip the medicine of bitterness. So that when you emerge, my sister, parting the beads of the rain, with your forehead of flowers and eyes of forgiveness. That's a lovely poem. And actually, it ties together a lot of things that I mentioned in my ramble about darkness, light, interplay, and moving from midsummer to Yule, and yeah, it captures all of that, and it captures the clash of thunder and me tumbling down the hill, and and all that stuff. And it's like I like it. When I was reading a few of Walcott's poems this week, I was thinking about that his very soft, subtle, playful wisdom. And I was thinking about, it's like talking to, a friend who has gone through a lot in life, or like some uncle who has stories and is telling you things in a gentle, tender, kind of humorous way. not to take life too seriously, but not to miss out on the lessons that we all must learn as we walk through this life. So that's a little bit what I thought of that, and I wanted to do one more Walcott. You know, but yeah, I of all the Caribbean countries I went to, I want to go back to Saint Lucia more, and it was from these conversations I had there, and also there was something so enchanting about the landscapes and the mystery, and then like the large part of the interior, which is completely undeveloped and looks forbidding, and that's so mountainous and thick with vegetation. And you're imagining those snakes and other critters looking around. And you also it has the world's only drive-through volcano, and you also have sulfur baths. So there are some resorts and stuff that play off the sulfur theme, the soufrière. No, it's so enchanting. But it was those particular conversations and just the openness, but they weren't doing it in like a salesy marketing way. It felt genuine, and we got like deep. I told these people things that I normally wouldn't tell somebody just the first time I talked to them. and they told me things that I didn't necessarily want to hear, but it brought out that it's much more satisfying than talking with an AI bot, and unfortunately some people have turned into AI bots, presupposing these horrible trends. But anyway, he says this is a great celebration of loving yourself or accepting yourself, or the joy in being alone, or something like that. Let's just say that. This is another Derek Walcott poem called Love After Love. He says, the time will come when, with elation, you will greet yourself arriving at your own door, in your own mirror, and each will smile at the other's welcome and say, sit here, eat. You will love again the stranger who was yourself. Give wine, give bread. Give back your heart to itself, to the stranger who has loved you all your life. When you ignored for another who knows you by heart, take down the love letters from the bookshelf, the photographs, the desperate notes. Peel your own image from the mirror. Sit, feast on your own life. I don't think that I need to comment more on that, but it's a remarkable poem of simple universal themes, but told in a slightly unexpected, somewhat startling way. And that I think, and I did the same thing when I discovered it this week, is that, at first you're like, oh, well, this doesn't really tell me anything I didn't already know, or that's all that interesting. But it's the placement and the pace and the rhythm of the poem that makes you, that makes it come alive, and that brings, and it has a couple vivid images in there. But it's not so much removed from kitsch, but it's definitely elevated. It's definitely elevated above that, and will get you to stop and consider where you're going and what you're doing at this moment. Anyway, I just thought those were some great thoughts on some of the shortest days of the year, And I'll try to come up with something next week for the shortest day of the year on our current calendar. Thank you.